No problem. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Lessons and Legacies in Masechet Avot with Rabbi Yonatan Kohn. This is at this point, I think you guys are all experienced. So just very quickly to introduce the class. Well, I think I'll just go through the quick housekeeping things, which is again, as I've mentioned, I'm going to be promoting people to be panelists, which doesn't put any pressure on you. It just gives you more abilities, such as raising your hand and turn on your camera, which we do encourage you to do. But we do ask that when you're not speaking, you keep your microphone muted. And if you have any questions, please, you can raise your hand or you can put them in the chat. Or if you're watching us on Facebook, you can put them in the comments there and I'm happy to pass them on. And I will be putting the source sheet in the comments in Facebook and the chat on Zoom for anyone who wants to follow along independently. And if you have any concerns, please let me know. I think you guys all know what we're doing here. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Rabbi Kohn, and look forward to another hour of learning. Rabbi Kohn.
Okay, thank you. It's great to be with everyone again. Good morning and good afternoon, respectively. We'll do a very quick recap of where we left last time, and that should be an appropriate segue into today's session. So, each of the last 3 weeks, we've done small topics within the first 3 chapters of Masechet Avot. And today we're going to see a topic from the 4th chapter. Last week, we spoke about the relationship between knowledge and chokhmah or knowledge, and 2 different pursuits that may complement or may exist independent of the knowledge, and the relationships between those things and the knowledge. And those 2 things were... Anybody?
One was Torah, right?
So we said the word chokhmah, which may or may not mean Torah. Last week we talked about the possible intersect. There were 2 mishnayot. There was the one of Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa, and then that of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa told us that a person's chokhmah has to play second fiddle to their yirat chet. Person's yirat chet has to be kodemet, and we talked about it. Kodemet means it has priority in terms of the totem pole. Pardon me for bringing in heathenism, right? The priority in the sense of hierarchy, or priority literally in the sense of chronologically prior, which is a little bit difficult. How could a person have fear of sin without knowing what sin is? We left that a little bit open, and hopefully that will be a little bit clearer today. But either way, it's a safe assumption, an easy understanding, that the point is, if a person's interested in chokhmah, it's the great irony. A person's interested in chokhmah, the way to get chokhmah is to de-emphasize chokhmah to a certain degree. But a person's wisdom has to be put into its proper context. You want to take care of it, put it in its place. You want to keep it, you put it in its place. So again, Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa highlighted, first of all, that that a person's chokhmah has to take a back seat or play second fiddle to their fear of sin. And secondly, that a person's deeds have to be more numerous than a person's wisdom as well. And then some time later, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah illustrated the relationship between the proper relationship between chokhmah and maasim, between wisdom and deeds, by giving us the example or the model of a tree. A person's wisdom is comparable to the branches of the tree. The branches, of course, are the part of the tree that we see, and the part of the tree that produces shade and that produces fruit. So the branches are obviously very important, and perhaps, again, as Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa said, that's the part of the tree we're most interested in. And yet, the branches have to be weighted down by the roots, and the roots are the deeds. Okay, we concluded last week with in the 11th hour with Debbie's question. Wait a second. All of this being so action focused, Rabbi Lazar ben Azariah, we saw there was this really striking impression, again in the illustration, and based on the verses that he quoted from Sefer Yirmiyahu, that if a person has so much wisdom and not so many deeds, that the wisdom actually weighs down the tree and makes it more vulnerable to the wind, which is almost like a little bit of a pushback to wisdom, which is disembodied by deeds. So with all of that illustration, Debbie said, wait a second, what happened to the concept of Torah lishma, Torah just for its own sake? And again, that was really just before the bell rang, so we didn't explore that too much, but it's a great segue into what we need to discuss today. We have to clarify exactly what Torah lishma means, and further explore how these different disciplines, the discipline of or let's say the plane of action and the plane of knowledge, how these interact with each other. Okay. Chaya, can I ask you to please share the sources? Okay. You know what? I'll do it myself. I'm not sure if Chaya. Oh.
Sorry, did you want me to share my screen?
Yeah, if you can just share the sources that we sent out.
Sure.
Thank you.
With my screen. I put them in the chat. Would
Yeah.
do you want me
okay.
to share my screen with them as well?
If it's better for me to share them myself, I'm
happy to do it. Just you tell me.
Yeah, so go ahead. Go ahead.
Sure. Certainly. Just getting that open. Sorry.
Okay.
One moment.
No problem. Okay, so just perhaps before we jump right in. Okay.
So can you see that?
Yeah, I see it. That looks good.
Excuse me, Rabbi Kohn. I wanted to tell you that I heard from Sheirith Israel, the Spanish-Portuguese synagogue. They were translating. They had a discussion about how to translate Pirkei Avot, and they came up with first principles.
Okay, yeah, I like that. So that I think complements nicely what we were suggesting here. Okay, maybe before we start to take a glance, as a prelude and perhaps a bridge comment from last week's question to the sources today. I wanted to mention the commentary of Abravanel, Rav Yitzchak Abravanel, or sometimes called Don Isaac Abravanel, about whom we can say next to nothing. And not that there's nothing known about him, but we don't have the time to get into his fascinating biography. He lived through, he was already a statesman at the time of the expulsion of Jews from Spain. And he was a statesman in Portugal and with the Spanish monarchs, and ultimately in Italy, lived a fascinating life. And he's best known to us probably for his commentary on the Chumash. He has a far less well-known commentary on Masechet Avot, and in his typical style, it is very long. He doesn't spare too much. However, I want to point out something that we actually touched upon by loose allusion last week, which I think helps to begin an answer to, or set up one direction to answer Debbie's question. Again, if you're going to tell me that the Torah, in order to be mitkayemet, either to endure or, as we said, to reach its kinetic energy, to really be fulfilled. For the Torah to be fulfilled, it has to express itself in deed. What happened to the concept of Torah Lishma? So Abravanel says, wait a second. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah didn't say anything at all about Torah. Didn't say anything negative about Torah as being heavy branches that will weigh down the tree in a storm. The word in the Mishnah of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was chokhmah. And as we pointed out last week, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah himself, he has a list of things that need to balance each other out in one way or another. And there was the word chokhmah appeared on that list. Im ein yirah ein chokhmah, im ein chokhmah ein yirah. But he also had separately im ein kemach ein Torah, im ein Torah ein kemach, which means to say that Torah and yirah are not the same thing. And sometimes they may overlap, but sometimes they may not. So Abravanel says, aha, I got you. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is not criticizing learning Torah ever. Learning Torah is never going to be a branch that's going to knock the tree over, says Abravanel. What might knock the tree over? Chokhmah. If there's a wisdom which is not the wisdom of the Torah, and you have so much wisdom and you learn so much, but it's not the tradition, and he spells out specifically the philosophical inquiry, which was really a lifelong campaign of Abravanel, fighting against the philosophy and how much a study of philosophy had tainted Jewish theology. So he says that kind of wisdom, because it's not grounded in deeds. What's deeds? Deeds is Torah. Deeds is mitzvot, right? So you could be very brilliant and you could have a lot of interesting things to say and engage in great debates. But if your life is just concepts that are not the concepts of the tradition, then you're a heavy tree waiting to be knocked over. And I would say that is very sympathetic to Debbie's question. It's a little bit anachronistic to speak that way, but if the premise is that Torah Lishma means Torah learning, which is not at all predicated upon where it's going to lead my life per se. I'm not opening a book with the halacha just to answer the question that I'm sitting at breakfast this morning and I had trail mix and I didn't know which bracha to make on the different pieces of trail mix. It's just one bracha or two brachot or three brachot. I pour it in milk. I don't know. There's all sorts of different questions that come up, and therefore I open the book. Okay. That's wonderful. Nobody's going to criticize that. But what if I pick up a book about Sefer Iyov, which is not halachic? Ostensibly, it's not halachic at all. It's a story. It's part of the Tanakh. So does Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah have a problem with Sefer Iyov? There's nothing that's going to contribute to my ma'asim, apparently, at all in Sefer Iyov. So maybe that's not a good use of my time, according to Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. To that, Abravanel says, absolutely not. That's wonderful because that's Torah. But if it's only Chokhmah, then that's the heavy branch on your tree, which is only useful if it's rooted in heavier roots. Okay, let's dip into today's sources, and we'll see a different approach and a different answer to Debbie's question. Okay, the first source on the page.
Prefer?
Yes.
Which would he prefer?
What do you mean? Which?
What
are the alternatives?
No. Would he prefer you to look in Iyov, or would he prefer you to look in the halacha?
Okay, good. I'm not sure I can answer that question, but we'll see perhaps another answer as we go along. I'm not sure about Abravanel per se. But as I said, this will go along. Hopefully we'll see another answer. Okay, so let's grab the question and hold on to it, and perhaps we'll get a little more insight as we go along. Okay, the fourth chapter. Now, I'm sorry, I do need to say one more thing again. I'm struggling. I hope that you join in my struggle a little bit between the limited time that we have and how much there is really to talk about and to study here. So the fourth, and we don't have time to read all of the sources inside. The fourth chapter of Avot has a clear theme. I will literally just mention this very briefly. The first Mishnah Avot in the fourth chapter is very famous. It asks who is wise and who is mighty and who is wealthy and who is honored. And these four questions really are presented to frame the entire chapter. The whole chapter, in one way or another, deals with these different universal pursuits. And I'm fighting the urge to go into too much of a tangent about it. But these are universal human pursuits that a person in their life in one's lifetime is tempted to chase after wealth, whatever wealth may be, and to chase after fame and honor, to chase after wisdom. These are things that one way or another a person might say, here's where I am going to leave my mark, or here's where I'm going to reach immortality. So I present that as the theme because the Mishnah that we're going to study today touches upon that as well. Okay, let's finally read together. Rabbi Ishmael Beno, and it says Beno because in the previous Mishnah we learned the teaching of his father. That's Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka. It's also important to say Beno because there are many rabbis in the Tanaitic period named Ishmael. Historically fascinating fact. I will bet that nobody here, nobody listening to this shiur, knows any Jew who's named Ishmael. Okay, it was a name obviously in Sefer Breshit, the name of Abraham's son, and then many Tana, as much as Abraham's son has an interesting story in Breshit, which it's not entirely clear how that story is resolved, but there are Tanaim named Ishmael. But now, after the beginning of the Islamic period, the name quickly falls aside as a Jewish name. In any case, this Rabbi Ishmael is the son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Baroka, Omer, Halomed Torah al menat lilamed, maspikin biado lilmod ulilamed. So Rabbi Ishmael, his son, said, he who learns in order to teach, it is granted to him maspikin biado. When we have that a usage of a word in this grammatical form, maspikin, that's third person plural, anonymous third person plural. Someone is doing something, but again, it's the someone in the plural. So they are doing something. So this refers to the heavenly tribunal or the powers that be. In other words, God brings it about in some way that the person will be able, maspikin, he will have the chance, li'ilmod ulilamed. So it's a noble endeavor. A person wants to teach. So Rabbi Ishmael teaches us, God says, maybe you want to teach, I will make that happen. I will give you the opportunity to learn and to teach. That in and of itself, that could have been a good Mishnah, and you stop here and you might say, I've learned something. But the contrast teaches you even more. But if someone learns in order to practice, in order to perform something, maspikin biado, they afford him the opportunity, lilmod ulilamed, to learn and to teach, lishmor v'lasot. Oh, this is not a great translation. Lishmor v'lasot, to observe and to practice. It's two verbs. They should have had two verbs here. Sorry. Lishmor is to avoid sin, and lasot is to do mitzvot. Okay, but you just put these two different scenarios next to each other. So Rabbi Ishmael, as much as there's no criticism at all for someone who wants to teach. But if someone's motivation is to perform, this person supersedes, they surpass the achievement, as Rabbi Ishmael says, right, that God will afford this person to do even more than the one who means to teach. This person has the prerequisites. It almost sounds like it's even stages. Obviously, well, let's just assume it's obvious. Obviously, if someone wants to teach, they need to know the material. So in order to teach, you're kind of taking for granted that you're going to learn the material well, and Rabbi Shimon grants God will grant that. That's his interpretation of the situation. But in order to do something, I don't necessarily need to be a teacher, right? If I want to know which bracha to say on my trail mix, as the example that we mentioned before, if I want to be able to know which bracha to say, I don't necessarily need to be able to teach that lesson. And yet, Rabbi Ishmael says all of the stages that precede that are part of the package that God will afford me. So, at the minimum, we could say Rabbi Ishmael seems to support, he falls into this camp that a supreme, not necessarily exclusive, but a supreme goal or premise of one's learning is implementing, lishmor v'la'asot, to bring it into performance. And this person gets the whole package. Right? When they said the magic word to God, help me to observe, and God says, okay, I'm giving you the whole bucket of Torah-related opportunities. Okay, I don't seem to have the source sheet on my screen. Was it lost from the yeah? Okay, so I'm just going to share my own copy.
Sorry. Oh, okay. If you prefer that, sorry, I was just turning it off while you were speaking. But
no, no. You know what? That's fine. But I'm not sure what's going on your end. Please put it back
sorry.
on.
No, I'm with you.
No.
Yeah.
That's great.
All right.
Thank you. Okay.
No problem. Thank you.
Okay, so let's put that back up. So that was Parak Daled, Mishnah Hey. Any question on that so far? No, pretty clear, right? Okay, so let's move on. Interestingly, within the same Mishnah, the way it is edited, and we talked a little bit about the editor, the anonymous editor of Masechet Avot. It's not just that we have a whole bag of toys, right, that someone just threw in and tied up the bag. And then each toy is its own identity. There's also an anonymous editor who's done a lot of work in terms of putting Masechet Avot together. That's all we'll say about that just now. We've mentioned it a little bit before. But within the same Mishnah, we have the following statement from another speaker. Rabbi Tzadok Omer, Al ta'asem atara lihitgadel behem, v'lo kardom lachpor behem. V'kach haya Hillel Omer, Udi ishtamesh betaga cholaf. Halamadata, kol hanehane midivrei Torah, notel chayav min ha'olam. Okay. Let us zoom in on Rabbi Tzadok for a second and forget the editor just for a moment. Okay. Rabbi Tzadok, why do I do that? There's two reasons. One is that that's really how everything in Avot is presented. We're hearing the quote. Right? There's the person who's sitting next to the speaker who's holding the microphone, but you wanna hear the soundbite. You want to hear the speaker, and then afterwards you can ask yourself, why did that person hold the microphone in that way? Or if you're watching a movie, why does the camera guy take this angle, take this specific angle of the video? But that's later analysis. The first thing is, let's just listen to Rabbi Tzadok himself. And Rabbi Tzadok, it has to be pointed out, is a first generation Tana. In other words, he lived before Rabbi Ishmael. So when he was speaking, he was not responding to Rabbi Ishmael at all, but the editor has put their statements together. So what does Rabbi Tzadok say? Do not make them a crown for self-exaltation, nor a spade with which to dig. So too Hillel used to say, and he who puts the crown to his own use shall perish. Thus you have learned, Anyone who derives worldly benefit from the words of the Torah removes his life from the world. Okay. Now, he uses the pronoun over here, them. Al ta'asem. Al ta'as otam, right? Al ta'asem atar litgadel behem. Do not make them a crown for self-exaltation. What is this pronoun referring to? What are the things that a person should not use for as a crown or as a spade?
I think it's your learning.
Great. Okay, the words of Torah. And that's certainly the way the editor is casting Rabbi Tzadok, that he's making reference to the same thing. Again, even though Rabbi Tzadok in his own time, and here now we have to remember that there's a video editor. We've put two video clips together. There was the clip of Rabbi Yishmael's shiur, and there's the clip of Rabbi Tzadok's shiur. So Rabbi Tzadok was not responding to Rabbi Yishmael, but he was talking about the same thing, about words of Torah, and the editor put them together in one clip. Okay? So as much as Rabbi Yishmael is focusing on action, Rabbi Tzadok is how could we kind of summarize Rabbi Tzadok's basic idea in a word? He gives three different statements, maybe you can say four statements, but they all revolve around one simple thing. And simply put, what is Rabbi Tzadok telling us?
Don't use your learning for your own self-aggrandization.
Good. Someone else? Let's see who's here. I don't see anyone else's video. That's good. Don't use the learning for your own self-aggrandization. I would say perhaps we could drop the word aggrandization. In other words, that's one of them. But don't use the learning for your own purposes, whatever those purposes are. Okay, and then he has a few different illustrations of what that might be, those inappropriate uses, but they're all personal uses. I would say, and here, this is the part that I bolded. To me, even before we started this course and before I started which Mishnayot to do in each chapter, I said to myself, I want to do this Mishnah specifically for two reasons. The first is that he quotes Hillel. And that particularly appealed to me because we saw Hillel's Mishnah also. We saw Hillel's Mishnah in the first parak. And now I have a question for the video editor. Okay, the video editor who put Rabbi Tzadok's statement in Masechet Avot. Why do you need to give me the part? You're an editor. You can cut and paste all the video clips you want. Why are you telling me what Hillel said? Why are you quoting Rabbi Tzadok quoting Hillel? We already saw Hillel ourselves. In other words, there's a certain point at which, I know that was 3 weeks ago, but really, we can't repeat everything every time. So this is already kind of striking, the fact that the Mishnah has to tell us what Rabbi Tzadok said about what Hillel said. Now, this is not the only example of this, and we saw even a little bit of it even last week. That was really kind of the same idea. Why does Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah talk about the relationship between your Torah, your wisdom, and your deeds, if Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa already addressed the same point? So part of it, of course, is really, we saw Hillel, we learned this statement from Hillel, which he spoke in Aramaic and Babylonian, and we kind of read it on its own terms. But here, Rabbi Tzadok is invoking it with his own interpretation. And that's part of what the Mishnah wants us to see. That Hillel said something, and it was true on its own terms. And I would add, and here you can argue with me, that's fine, but I would add, when you're learning the first chapter, don't interpret Hillel based on Rabbi Tzadok. Again, when you're learning the first chapter and you see Hillel's statement in its own context, then you read it in its own context. When you're learning the fourth chapter, now Rabbi Tzadok's point, or at least the editor's point, is to show you a new aspect or a new application of what Hillel said, which you would not have known from the first chapter. Someone started to say something out. Yeah.
Is it possible that the editor is concluding that Rabbi Tzadok's statement means strengthening, and he brings Hillel to strengthen Rabbi Tzadok's statement?
Okay, sure, of course. I would say more than that. This, if I understand correctly, this is Rabbi Tzadok himself speaking. So more than just the editor thinks Rabbi Tzadok needs that strengthening, needs that extra authority. Rabbi Tzadok himself might be saying, I need that extra authority. Don't just take it from me. This is what Hillel himself said.
Okay, good.
Okay. Okay. But let's talk about this for a second. I really like this image of the crown. And in fact, Rabbi Tzadok uses it twice. I mean, one is Hillel's, but in his first line, he says, do not make them a crown. Do not turn them into a crown for your own aggrandizement, for your own exaltation. And that's what Hillel said also, whoever uses the crown shall perish. What does that mean? It doesn't mean that a person should, who is he cautioning? What kind of Jew? Sorry, without playing
maybe a Nazir. Maybe a Nazir.
Wow. Okay, that's very specific. I wasn't gonna. I didn't mean for that, but sure, maybe a Nazir. Just can you explain a little bit of why you say a Nazir?
I guess I just finished Masechet Nazir and in Mishnah Yomis, and Nezer Elokav al Rosho, that phrase is used, and that's considered a crown.
Okay.
And I guess that he considers himself above other people.
Okay.
In a certain sense.
I like that you used the word above, right? We're talking about a crown, and a crown is above. So that's not an accident. In other words, there's something about the loftiness of it.
That you feel right. That you feel that when you do the mitzvot, or when you have a certain amount of knowledge, you feel that you are an elite.
Okay.
You know, I think that's
okay. Great. Let's take a step back a little bit. A couple of the features of the Nazir that you just mentioned, that he has better deeds, and then he's very learned. Rabbi Tzadok is not addressing a disengaged Jew. He's addressing a very engaged Jew. In other words, there's someone who maybe despite, you could say because of, but related to their degree of connection to Torah specifically, that's the person who must be cautious. He's not talking to the ignorant person, and there are other Mishnayot. Hillel himself, actually, this is really, we can't go down this avenue too far, but Hillel himself talks about reaching out to the message of Aharon, loving people and bringing them close to the Torah. But Hillel is talking to a leader who should take responsibility for others. Rabbi Tzadok is also talking to the leader, and he says, as much as you are the leader, you have to have a certain respect for the crown that sits upon your head. Okay. If you were to ask me what Rabbi Tzadok's relationship to the crown is, or how he describes the crown, I would say he's encouraging a person to even perhaps to leave the crown aside. I've been teaching, learning and teaching Pirkei Avot in different contexts for many years. And perhaps I thought of this before and forgot it, but I actually think it never really occurred to me that maybe the most famous Mishnah in the whole 4th chapter also talks about the crown, and it talks about the crown of Torah in a very different light. So let's look back at the sheet here, and this is source number 5. We will come back to 3 and 4 momentarily, but we just had Lag BaOmer, so this is also part of why all of a sudden the Mishnah hit me. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai didn't only teach the Zohar. We have many statements in the Gemara from Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and we have a Mishnah from him in Masechet Avot as well. So Rabbi Shimon Omer, and this is Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Shlosha ktarim heim. There are 3 crowns: Keter Torah, the Keter Kehuna, the Keter Malchut, the Keter Shem Tov Ole al Gabehen. The crown. There are 3 crowns: the crown of Torah, the crown of priesthood, and the crown of royalty. But the crown of a good name supersedes them all, or rises above them all. Okay? So, again, just trying to understand the concept of the crown. Rabbi Shimon is talking about someone who wears the crown or doesn't wear the crown. In other words, if I would just have the Mishnah of Rabbi Tzadok, I would have thought, you know what, this is a crown. It's almost like I'm going into a museum. I'm going into a museum, and here's a crown, and it's sitting in the case. And that's where it belongs. And I have a lot of respect for the crown, but I'm certainly not going to put it on my head. And Rabbi Shimon is talking about a person wearing the crown on one's own head. So how do we balance these things? Does Rabbi Shimon argue with Rabbi Tzadok? Right. Leaving aside the question of Keter Shem Tov, right? Which again, unfortunately, just in the constraints of the course, we can't talk about that just now. But that he acknowledges that there is a Keter Torah. What does Rabbi Shimon assume a person is doing with that Keter Torah? Is it a good question, or am I making something out of nothing?
It always strikes me as one you can earn and one you can't.
Okay, so now, Rabbi Tzadok, tell me, does that idea bother you? Are you offended by that?
I think they have different opinions on it.
So they disagree, or they're just emphasizing? Okay. Anyone else? Okay. Let's go back to Rabbi Tzadok again. Yeah, please.
I'm just, this is not really a response to you, but I'm just thinking about this, and I think it's interesting that Rabbi Shimon, in the story that we always talk about, it like he learned Torah in a cave for some number of years, ostensibly getting very little credit from other people for it. So he seems like you would think he would be the one who would give the masterclass and like doing it just for yourself and for God, and other people are not as so I just think that's really interesting. And
that's really nice.
The
question of anonymity.
Yeah, but I'm trying to sort of respond to myself, but I wonder if that that you could imagine that time learning alone, like contributing to like a stronger sort of sense of like interiority, or like a sense of self-concept as a Torah learning person, and what that could mean for the Keter, and whether that Keter, I thought it was interesting what Deborah said about whether it can be earned, because it's, well, I don't know. I'm just thinking about how Kehuna and Malchut definitely can't be earned. And with Torah, do we think of that something that's just like anyone can put their mind to, or is that like something that is grouped with Kehuna and Malchut that might be like bestowed upon you? But Shem
Okay.
Tov, I think, is like definitely, sorry, I won't go on, but I just thinking a Shem Tov seems fundamentally about other people and how you interact with them and how they perceive you. And I feel like Torah sort of straddles the line between something that could be personal and something that could be public. That's what I'm thinking about.
Okay. Abba, you're muted. Chai, can you?
So
Okay.
I think the point
Yeah,
of
start
Chaya,
again, please.
I think the point of Chaya is very well taken. When Shimon Bar Yochai first left the cave, he had this tremendous crown of Torah. And what did Hashem tell him to do? Told him, you better go back in the cave because you don't know how to act with other people. So Shimon learned from that experience that interacting with other people is very important to Hashem. And that, of course, is the Shem Tov. So I think it's experientially, it works very well for what he did.
Okay. I appreciate the point. It's a little bit in a different direction. I mean, I'm again, in other words, point well taken. But I don't think it helps us so much to understand, what exactly you're supposed to do about the crown. In particular, is there a way does Rabbi Shimon see himself as arguing on Rabbi Tzadok? That's the question I would like to answer. So let's go back to Rabbi Tzadok for a moment. Chaya, please just scroll up back on the page a little bit so the Mishnah's clear. Yeah, right there, perfect. Let me highlight a couple words. Rabbi Tzadok Omer, Al ta'asem atara lihitgadel bahem, v'lo kardom lachpor bahem. V'kach haya Hillel Omer, u'deishtamesh betagah cholaf. Halamadata kol hanehene midivrei Torah notel chaya min ha'olam. Again, I think it will also help us. I'll emphasize the words in English as well, okay? Do not make them a crown for self-exaltation, nor a spade with which to dig. That's what Hillel used to say. He that puts the crown to his own use, to ishtamesh, will perish. And thus you have learned anyone who derives worldly benefit, and they threw in the word worldly. He may or may not accept that, but okay, we'll give them a pass on that one for now. But it's not literal, but that's what the word nehana often indicates. Let's take a step back from this again and look at the whole chapter. The chapter, as I said, begins with the question: who is considered wise? Who is wealthy? Who is strong? And who is honored? And to this, the editor says, you want to talk about honor? Let's talk about honor. There's a king, and the king walks around with a crown on his head. Now tell me, when you look at the king and you honor the king, whom are you, as an onlooker, whom are you honoring? What are you honoring? What is more worthy of the honor, the crown or the king? There's a certain king who will put the crown on his head as a piece of jewelry to say, when the crown is on my head, then you're going to look at me. And another person says, well, that crown can't just sit in a box. I'm going to put the crown on because the crown is worthy of being worn. The crown needs to be represented, and not just represented, actualized. But it's not about me. It's about the crown. I can't turn the crown into a tool for my own personal benefit. I am in service of the crown more than the crown is in service of me. And in that sense, Rabbi Shimon says, I know there are crowns, and here are the crowns that the Torah speaks of. What does it mean? What do I even need to know this? What is the takeaway from Rabbi Shimon's Mishnah? Is to tell me what things are worthy, or to tell me whom I should, as an average person, whom should I respect? I should respect the person who's wearing these crowns. Maybe Rabbi Shimon is going in a different direction altogether. And I'll now incorporate your comments before about the importance of Shem Tov. As much as I already know that I have to honor some things, Shem Tov is really worth honoring. Or again, as my own pursuit, yeah, maybe I got this crown, maybe I got that crown, but the Keter Shem Tov is even greater, and that's the one that I should be pursuing. Rabbi Shimon, aside a little bit though, his premise was the Torah is a crown, or there is the crown of the Torah. But Rabbi Tzadok says, you don't take the crown and turn it into a gardening tool, right? Nor a spade with which to dig. And in that sense, he's giving us a new angle on what exactly, and it fits into the theme of the 4th chapter. There are some things that are associated with me, but they're not about me. And in particular, when it comes to Torah, again, it's good for me. There is a crown. I would say that Rabbi Tzadok totally accepts Rabbi Shimon's premise. Again, we're going a little bit anachronistically where we're describing it. But there is such a thing as a crown of Torah. Hillel already told us there's a crown of Torah. I accept that there's a crown of Torah. We have to be very, very careful that the crown of Torah is not the Torah honoring me, it's me honoring the Torah. And here, I want to come back to Debbie's question from last week and go and present the opposite side. Your question is a theological question, but it's also, interestingly, importantly, it's a historical question. In a broad sense, and there are exceptions to this rule, but in a broad sense, literally for centuries, there has been a kind of a machloket in the Spanish Sephardic tradition and the Ashkenazic tradition regarding the answer to what is called Torah Lishma. You asked the question last week, used the language, what about, you're talking about the importance, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah is emphasizing the importance of Torah that has to be anchored in deeds. But what about Torah Lishma? What about Torah for its own sake? The tantalizing and gripping, aspect or question surrounding this word that we hear, Lishma, is of course that it is intentionally and definitively ambiguous for its own sake. What is its own sake? What is the sake of Torah need? So let's sharpen this question a little bit by recalling a Mishnah. You have it in front of you, and we won't read it inside right now. But the 3rd Mishnah, Masechet Avot. Again, the whole 1st chapter is probably the best well-known because a lot of people start with the 1st chapter and they don't necessarily, or they spend a long time on it, don't necessarily get so much further. But this is already Antignos Ish Socho, dealt with a very similar issue and came to a very similar formulation. He said, don't be among those who serve the master in order to receive a prize. Rather, be those who serve the master for what purpose? He doesn't tell us. Serve the master not on the condition to receive a prize, which is quite ambiguous. But a large impulse in the tradition, really even going all the way back to the Gemara, and now we'll do source number 4. We'll do it actually inside. So from Masechet Avodah Zarah. The Gemara is explaining a pasuk from Tehillim. Ashrei ish yarei et Hashem b'mitzvotav chafetz ma'od. Happy is the man that fears the Lord. He delights greatly in his mitzvot. So there's a beautiful inference that the Gemara makes over here. Rabbi Elazar says, b'mitzvotav, the person delights in the mitzvot, v'lo b'schar mitzvotav, and he's not delighting in the reward of the mitzvot. The mitzvot themselves cause the person to delight. And in fact, the Gemara in the next line, I didn't quote it because it's redundant. I could have maybe shown you a little bit, sorry. And in the very next line of the Gemara says, and that's what Antigonos Ish Socho taught you. This is Antigonos Ish Socho who said, don't be servants who serve the master on the condition to receive the prize. Meaning to say, lishma. Serve God lishma. Okay, good. But what does lishma mean? So, Debbie's question last week, if I'm not mistaken, was strongly influenced by a very popular movement in the late 19th and 20th centuries. It's still going on. Perhaps best popularized by a sefer called Nefesh HaChaim by Rav Chaim of Volozhin, which says that just learning the Torah, just because one falls in love with the Torah as God's word, that is the supreme. There's nothing higher than that. Love of Torah just as the engagement with God's word. And he describes that at great length and literally had created a whole movement, even in terms of the yeshivot, of which masechto to learn the yeshivot. I specifically mentioned Rav Chaim of Volozhin by his name because his descendants, his famous descendants, most famous descendants are the Soloveitchiks. Yeshivot in Israel, it was less so in America, but the yeshivot in Israel, the Soloveitchik yeshivot, the Brisker yeshivot, focused traditionally, they still do, on the Talmudic tractates that deal with the Beit HaMikdash and Taharot, things which are really not practical. And why? Because of the importance of just sinking yourself into Torah just for Torah, and not that the halacha doesn't matter, but there's nothing greater than opening it up because you love it, not because you want to find a specific answer to your problem. In other words, you're going to reduce Torah to, what am I going to say on my, what bracha am I going to recite on my trail mix? That's all the Torah is about the trail mix. And then on the other side, you have the Sephardic tradition. And I say literally going back hundreds of years to the Middle Ages. We can talk about this a lot more, but there was always in the Spanish tradition in particular an emphasis on what's called asuke hilchata, asuke shmatata aliba de hilchata, to conclude the Gemara according to the halacha, a focus on what is the practical takeaway. And I found I quoted an introduction that Rav Ovadia Yosef writes to his Tshuvot, Yechaveh Da'at, where he goes out of his way to criticize the yeshivot. He doesn't say them by name, but to criticize the yeshivot where they're doing taharot and kodashim, because he says that's not called lishma. It's not, lishma means the Torah is a book of instruction. The Torah is a Tarat Chaim because of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. It has to influence your life, and if it's just hanging up in the air, it's not influencing your life in the same way. It's not allowing it to be mitkayemet. The Torah has to be something which is not just up in the air, but grounded in the roots. And that's basically two different major schools about how to treat the Torah lishma. Okay, we're out of time, so we'll do our quick summary. We started with the question, what is the proper relationship between Torah and deeds? Does Torah need to be anchored in deeds in order to be mitkayemet, in order to be fulfilled? Is it a bad thing to have Torah which is not anchored in deeds? And the Ashkenazic tradition, which has become popular, the Lithuanian tradition of Rav Chaim of Volozhin, says, in fact, no, any Torah and any Torah has to be learned for its own sake, and that's supreme. If you're learning Torah, not Chokhmah, but you're learning Torah, the Torah is in and of itself meaningful and in fact supreme. And then on the other hand, we had the approach of the Sfaradim, which says, no, Torah Lishma means Torah which has to be realized in the world. Now, how does this relate? how does the person relate to the Torah that they carry? So again, the Torah is a crown. Rabbi Tzadok says Torah can be called lishma so long as it's not used for personal gains. In other words, both of the and personal interests, both of the schools of the Ashkenazim and the Sfaradim can acknowledge that until you've reached a point where Torah is being used for self-interest, even if you say the Torah, this is what the Ashkenazic answer to Rabbi Ovadia Yosef would be, it's okay that I'm learning Taharot and I'm going to have to look up separately, or I'm going to have to ask someone what bracha to say in my trail mix. I'm spending hours learning something about the Beit HaMikdash, but I still don't know what to say in my trail mix. That's not bad, because I'm still not using the Torah for personal gains. I'm learning the Torah because I love it. I'm learning the Torah because it's God's word. Rabbi Tzadok is saying, as much as it's glorious, remember that the glory comes from the crown, and I should say the glory belongs to the crown, and the glory does not belong to you.
Couldn't we say that different people have different needs and it'll appeal to different people differently?
That would be nice. Again, the question is, what does lishma mean? Really, fundamentally, when and maybe we're even conflating terms that don't need to be conflated. Antigonos Ish Socho didn't even say lishma. He said, don't serve out of self-interest. So then where does that leave us in terms of for its own sake? What is its own sake? For us, I mean, I would say, as an educator, I would say, which path connects you greater to the big system. Person's learning in a brisk yeshiva and they're frustrated that they don't know what to say on their trail mix. Then go to a Sephardic yeshiva where they're learning what to say on the trail mix, and vice versa. Someone says, I don't want to be stuck in my trail mix. I want to go past that. So okay, go try a brisker yeshiva.
Some people would more prefer the hashkafa classes. Some people would more the halacha classes. Some,
Sure.
But it's all different drachim to Hashem. As long as you're not doing it for your own self-aggrandizement, I think they'd all agree on it.
I think that's, in other words, this tension or balance between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Tzadok, I think that has to be the direction. Rabbi Shimon says it is a crown. Rabbi Tzadok also says it's a crown. So what's the deal? Is the crown good or bad? And that's the point. The crown is good, but the crown is not your own personal good.
Okay, do we have any? I just want to give another moment, Rabbi Kohn, if you don't mind, in case there are any last questions.
I'm here all week.
Okay. Meanwhile, I'll just plug one really. First of all, I don't know. All right. It seems like we don't have any questions. If anyone does while I'm speaking, please raise your hand or let us know. But thank you again so much. Thank you, Rabbi Kohn, again for this class. Thank you to everyone who joined us. And I think we said last week, I think we have one more week of this, right? Or is it one more week? Okay. So looking forward to seeing you all next week. And I just want to plug, this Friday is the deadline for any applications to our online summer kollel at Drisha, which is going to be really, really wonderful. In the morning, we're going to be learning, I believe, Makot. We're going to be learning Makot with Rabbi Dan Margulies. We're going to be learning a variety of Tanakh and Machshava topics in the afternoon. So please go to drisha.org and you can find out about that, and also all of our other Sphira classes that we have and other programs coming up. And I think that's about it. So yeah, do check that out. We have a lot of exciting things. Thank you again so much for joining us. I apologize again for my technical difficulties at the beginning there, but looking forward to seeing you all next week. Hopefully will be smoother and we'll continue to learn. So yeah, thank you again, Rabbi Kohn, and thank you to everyone for joining us.
Thank you.
Have a good week.